Alright, time to get this one started. This is the last one where you will probably see this room because I have a brand new setup that I am very excited to use for videos. So everyone say goodbye to the old horrible laptop that I used to record this and hello to me having something that can reasonably produce something that would have existed in 2013. Recently I was on a stream and I said something that prompted a reaction from my partner. And that reaction was, that might actually be libel. And on my stream, libel is kind of a catch-all term for what is actually usually slander. That's usually what I'm up to on there, and what we might broadly categorize as defamation. The UK has quite strict laws about what you can and can't say about someone. And if you were wondering what the thing I said on stream was, it was that is very much a modern barrier. Which, yeah, you'll have noticed that I bleeped some of that out, because on the off chance this video does get the blessing of the algorithm, I don't want to be sued over what's clearly a joke and not a reference to that aspect of Barrier's personality, which raises the question, why? Why do I need to censor that comment before I publish it? You'll remember my video about comedians that I said no one's getting sent to jail for jokes, despite the best effort of Nigel Farage to get Joe Brand arrested for a joke about him. While what I said is still clearly a joke, it's entirely possible that someone might take the spirit of it seriously, which would mean that it's quite a heavy thing to just say and publish in a deliberate way, like the format of this video, rather than just an obvious joke where I'm routinely doing things like inbreeding any percent runs in CK3. I would say that having to censor an obvious joke in case the wrong person sees it and takes it seriously, grasses on me, and then gets me sued, seems like a bit of a problem, actually. A lot like how people joke about being put on a list. We joke about it because we know it happens. So let's dig into it. See if there's some kind of sinister threat beneath all of this, and see whether or not I can say that statement uncensored at the end of the video. Probably not, but let's see. Also, before we get into this, I just want to say, to be very clear, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. This is going to be very UK focused with a side order of American, because I am very, very, very jealous of your First Amendment rights. Don't take this video too seriously. Don't go onto X or Blue Sky or wherever you spend most of your social media time and publicly defame someone because the YouTuber said that the laws were dumb. Just enjoy the video for what it is. It's also going to be a bit shorter because the last one was very long and on a tougher subject, and I just kind of hope this one isn't, but we'll have to see. But before we get into it, I just want to say, do you enjoy the videos? Like, comment, subscribe, share the video, all the good things. It does really, really help us as content creators, and I hate to do the generic YouTuber thing, but I guess you kind of have to do it now. But anyway, let's get right into it. Free speech is often spoken of as something that's under threat. Under threat from what? Well, it depends who you ask. If you were asking me, I'd say that a good example would be the fact that a member of the House of Lords has called for the expulsion of a student and for her arrest for the crime of wearing a jacket that looks kind of like the Palestinian flag, and her team on University Challenge having an octopus plush as their mascot. Genuinely, the resemblance is so incidental that I kinda didn't really see it at first, so we could only conclude that there's some other motivation at play, and gee, might we wonder what that is. If you were to ask right-wingers who care about this stuff, or who claim they care about this stuff, their answer is usually something like, and I have to apologise for the voice that I'm going to use here, woke lefty liberals on university campuses, which is a really, really long way of saying people of colour, but hey, that's freedom of speech, right? I can't compel them to be concise and say what they clearly actually mean. To assess whether something is a threat to free speech, or indeed whether it is under threat, we need to understand the current state of it. I mentioned that I was jealous of America's First Amendment rights, and I am, but I'm also aware that that set of rights is not a panacea. The power still matters, and that you still can't really say any old shit that you want in America. I do sometimes wonder what the difference is, and there are differences, but some of the reasons why I may not feel like I run into as many free speech limitations as, some other people are, one, no one gives a fuck what I have to say, and I mean that in the best possible way. Two, I'm not one of those people who's looking for the one situation where you get to say a slur. Like, I'm not one of those Twitch streamers who's like, what if the only way to stop a nuclear bomb from exploding was to say a slur? Like, yeah, that's such an extreme situation that it looks like you're just, like, desperate to say it. Stop making these situations up. Three, I'm wired to be a little bit conservative with the scripted videos. So even when I am looking into stuff like the Ashfield Independents and their frankly unbelievable series of what I will call snafus, I just don't cross any of those lines. To give an example of where free speech is not protected in America and in Britain, you can't cite free speech as a reason to not be prosecuted for fraud. Yeah, you've exercised your speech and you've said whatever you've wanted to say, and no one really stopped you from saying it, but it's not protected speech, and you'll still suffer some kind of penalty for it. Which is, good, actually. Don't do fraud, I guess. That's kind of the only real legal advice I can give on this video. Don't do fraud. Good. Alright, glad we've got that. There is one place in the UK where you do have absolute free speech because of something called parliamentary privilege, which was really a thing to stop the king from executing you for treason because you criticised the government. Alright, I'm exaggerating a little bit there, but given some of the things Parliament has done in the past, it certainly seems like a good idea. I mean, look, I did a whole video about monarchy, and I definitely talked about the English Civil War in that video, so you should go check that one out. It was really good fun to record. There are a couple of famous exercises of parliamentary privileges that I can remember in my lifetime, but the one I want to focus on right now is the Ryan Giggs super injunction incident. Ryan Giggs was a footballer, quite a good one, and it turned out he was having an extramarital affair. Now, this isn't something I find the energy to care about, but I guess footballers have to maintain some kind of, like, reputation, and I guess if you're endorsed by, like, sports brands, it matters. I don't know, it's a whole thing. Anyway, what do you do when this information is available to the press but you don't want them to publish it? You get an injunction, or to use the colloquial term for what this was, a super injunction that prevents the publication of your name and certain specific details related to whatever the press have on you. Ryan Giggs did that, but a member of parliament named John Hemming named him as the person who had taken out the super injunction. The part in Hansard about this has a very funny bit about Giles Corran facing prison, which, look, like, my whole thing in this video is that the legal system is being unfairly used to curtail free speech, but, like, maybe we should let him cook on that one, like, if that's what's gonna happen, I say let him cook, right? The point is, John Hemming was able to name him because he had parliamentary privilege. Those 75,000 people on Twitter he referenced when he was naming him probably do not have parliamentary privilege, just on, like, a numerical level, right? You wouldn't imagine that they do have parliamentary privilege. But, like, are you really going to arrest 75,000 people for naming a footballer? Probably not. And once an MP names you in Parliament as the guy and the international press is reporting it, it's pretty much game over. You're done. It's over. You can't, stop it. So unless you're in Parliament, you do have some limits on your speech. You can't break injunctions, you can't commit fraud, you can't defame people. I mean, what a ridiculous set of restrictions, really. I'm very appalled by this deeply restrictive set of rules that we appear to have. Look, in seriousness, I would argue, as I did back in the video about comedians, that is probably mostly for the best. A free speech Wild West looks a lot more like 4chan than a place where people with bad ideas get owned by facts and logic. As just some guy, you have to actually push really hard to run afoul of something related to your speech, but the fact is that these limits do exist, and people do cross those lines. In fact, they cross them all the time. About all sorts of people. In fact, by the definition of defamation, you've probably had it happen to you. And this is interesting at a time when anyone with a social media account could have any old shite they say reach a large audience. The question that comes to my mind is, what can you do about it? What options are on the table if someone defames you? And are those tools actually useful at all for their intended purpose? I guess let's find out. When I speak about this colloquially, like anywhere, I tend to use the term libel as a catch-all term for what I really mean, which is defamation. More specifically, what I'm joking about most of the time is actually slander and not libel. Defamation has a pretty precise definition, and if you Google defamation definition UK, which, as I say, is a bit of a mouthful, you get a lot of results for law firms and the actual government, so I'm just going to pinch this one from one of them, probably the actual government. A defamatory statement is one which injures the reputation of another person. It tends to lower him in the estimation of right-thinking members of society generally. When you read that, you realize something important. That covers an awful lot of things. For example, would right-thinking members of society think less of you if they knew that you refused to get your round in at the pub? I mean, some would, but does it actually matter? Is it like defamation to say that about someone? Are you going to be unfairly maligned and like prevented from getting jobs and stuff just because people think you occasionally skip out and get in a round of drinks at the pub? No. Like, it might make you look like a bit of a dick, but that's not what defamation is trying to cover here. This is probably the time to just get the libel versus slander distinction cleared up. Yes, they are both forms of defamation, but they're defined on the Health and Safety Executive, which, I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't really know was a thing, and it feels like, given how often I, used to handle chemicals, I probably should have known it was a thing. Their website defines it like this. Such a statement constitutes libel if it is published. Publication for these purposes is simply the communication of the defamatory matter to a third person, and in writing, print, or some other permanent form. A statement will amount to a slander if it is published and made orally or in some other transient form. That actually raises a question for me, like, what if you had a plane write a message in the sky that was defamatory? By definition, it's transient, but it is in writing. So which is it? Libel or slander? You can go ahead and make arguments about that in the comments, but I'm just going to say it is probably slander. But I just liked imagining writing something libelous with a plane. It just seems like a bit of good, clean fun to wind someone up. You'll notice from the definition that an awful lot of things can be filed under defamation. And in a situation where basically everyone is a publisher of some kind, hasn't basically everyone in the UK defamed someone at some point? The answer is probably yes. Especially when you consider that sharing defamatory material might open you up to liability. So in that case, why isn't everyone in court right now or being served papers constantly? The reason is that most of what we would colloquially call libel isn't really actually libel, at least not in the way that I describe it when I say that on stream. This is kind of the hard part to explain, but the main reason why you don't see everyone sue for every little thing is that's kind of ridiculous, right? I remember a time when Americans being overly litigious was a common joke among friends of mine growing up. You know, like, if an American punched you in the face and he hurt his hand, he'd sue you type stuff. That kind of applies here too. Let's take a simple statement. Ian Austin shags dogs. This statement, on its face, is clearly defamatory because if someone believed it, they'd probably think less of Ian Austin, who shags dogs. Here's the thing though, no one is meant to believe that member of the House of Lords Ian Austin shags dogs. It's absurd to the point that if Ian Austin were to, for example, DM a bunch of shitposters on what was then called Twitter to threaten them with legal action, it wouldn't perform the function of a defamation lawsuit, primarily because it would lend credibility to something no one is really meant to believe. Why are you going to sue someone for saying you shag dogs unless you think you have the personality or demeanor of a dog shagger? I mean, come on, look at the guy. He does look like he might take the term dogging a bit too literally, but come on. Really? You're gonna sue people for saying you shag dogs? I'm just saying, okay? Let's suppose someone said something that a right-thinking member of society might actually take seriously. What could you do about it? And I mean a specific you here, because YouTube tells me who you are. And if you're watching a video, you're probably a guy from the UK who's like 25 to 34 years old. Not exactly a demographic known for having money which is a pretty important component of being able to hire lawyers. People make fun of lawyers and disparage them, but the job does involve a lot of work that requires an awful lot of years of study that they get paid really well for. You know, they do get paid well, which means that procuring the services of a defamation lawyer is really, really, really expensive. Like, I've spent a bunch of money on a series of obnoxious computer parts, thanks to one special viewer for providing basically a ready-made computer for me to use without the graphics card and the SSDs, and I wouldn't drop the amount of money needed to just get these people to send a letter. A quick Google tells me it's like $1.5 to $2.5 grand before tax just to do that. It's just not on the table for most of us to be able to afford defamation lawyers, and this dynamic does cut both ways on offense and defense. It turns out lawyers do not work pro bono very often in the defamation dojo, which, you know, fair enough. I too like to get paid for my labor, in which case, you know, if you would like to help me with that, we do have YouTube memberships now, and we also still have a Patreon, so, you know, you can do that now. God, that was cheap. I enjoyed that a lot. It is worth noting that there are some defamation lawyers who have taken cases pro bono in the UK, but these are the exception, not the rule. The times they tend to do it are very specific. Either there's some kind of alignment between client and lawyer that's relevant, or because the lawyer is really, really sure they're going to win. Which, yeah, I get it. I like to win too. If it's this expensive to just get lawyers to start doing their job, what are you really hoping to get out of it? For one, money. You can get a pretty tidy sum from a successful defamation lawsuit in the UK, and you get your costs covered by the person you're suing, so in effect, it's kind of free if you win. It's just initially very expensive. The typical amount is something like £5,000 to £50,000, and I mean 5,000, not just £5. You don't just get like a crisp fiver if you win a defamation. That's, you know, it could be more or less than, you know, £5,000, but if it's less, then, you know, you do start to wonder if you're not looking like that Always Sunny episode where an eye is lost and the damages are like $100. Like, just don't be those guys, okay? It really depends on the specific thing that's happened and how much the original statement is supposed to have damaged your reputation. That's the other nice thing you get from winning. You get a handy court decision to point to that provides some strong basis for you to being able to say, hey, I didn't do or say that thing. And a victory in court should deter others from making similar claims. Sometimes you don't even have to go to court, and a settlement is reached. In fact, that does happen probably most of the time here. The one that I found funniest that I can remember is the infamous Ben Bradley please retweet apology, which had some highlights in it, such as accusing Jeremy Corbyn of being a spy, which, let's be honest, made him sound kind of cool, having to pay his legal costs, donating the damages to a charity of Jeremy Corbyn's choice, which turned out to be a food bank in his constituency, and just the ending, please retweet. I mean, imagine being the one person stupid enough to defame a guy the press lied about constantly, and then having to add please retweet to the end of it. I hope whichever lawyer sort of had the idea to include that demand got a bonus. They earned it. I mean, they also earned their massive salary in this case. It was very funny. Some of the reasons that Ben Bradley, or indeed anyone being sued, may have chosen to settle include it's very expensive to go to court. It's very expensive to go to court and lose a defamation case. The thing that he said was actually defamatory, and that is a key point here. If what you say is true, that is pretty much your get out of jail free card with defamation. And also, like, the fourth point is it's really stressful to be sued. Like, it sucks, right? You'll notice that 50% of those reasons I mentioned relate directly to money. One of them relates to how much of a pain it is. While all four of these may have been true in Ben Bradley's case, we only know for a fact that one of them was, which was that what he said was defamatory. What happens if this leverage from those other 3 points is used in a malicious way? I mean, could you even do that? And what would it mean for the people who aren't defaming others but who are strongly criticizing certain figures in a way that may be interpreted as defamation? It's time to introduce you all to the concept of a slap. No, not that kind of slap.
Senin çenenin bağa düşmüş.
What I mean is strategic lawsuits against public participation. Slaps are a natural consequence of a lot of different factors, primarily that the penalty for defamation is quite severe, which means that people, generally speaking, do not want to suffer that penalty. To give an example of how this is not just a problem in the UK, while you might have to pay a lot of money in the UK, in Australia, you can actually go to jail for defamation, which, you know, cool. Very cool. I'm sure that couldn't possibly be exploited. The government once again has a handy definition for us to lean on, so let's turn to the fact sheet on slaps, which sounds a lot more exciting than it is, whose existence is a pretty good indication, by the way, that this is actually something of a problem. Slaps are legal actions typically brought by corporations or individuals with the intention of harassing, intimidating, and financially or psychologically exhausting opponents via improper use of the legal system. Slaps are typically framed as defamation cases brought by wealthy individuals or corporations to evade scrutiny in the public interest. As I said, this is the natural consequence of a variety of factors, and I'd say this existing as like a thing that you can do is bad. Not to be too controversial on the channel. Slaps can be applied in a variety of ways, but usually the target is someone who's particularly susceptible to either being unable to handle the expense, which is like most people who exist, and or who can't deal with the stress of being sued, which I would also say is like probably most people who exist. One of the instances cited on the government fact sheet that I omitted from the definition just to make sure we were clear that this is, not just about that particular case, was Russian oligarchs. And it isn't a coincidence that this fact sheet and potential government actions, which we can get into in a little bit, really kicked into gear with a call for evidence in March 2022. Like, it's just remarkable timing. It is true that Russian oligarchs could and have used slaps in this way. It's equally true that anyone with means, a public profile, and the inclination to do so could do the same. It's clear that when we narrow it down this much, we're really talking about like a tiny segment of the population. When we're getting into talking about oligarchs, corporations, people who can afford protracted litigation, and those who are minded to do all of this, we've narrowed our culprits to like the population of a small town. Yet this tiny segment of the population, and this might sound familiar, can exercise an astonishing amount of power because of their means, just this time they're doing it in the legal sector. That's not to say a rich person has never been defamed before, but I'm left wondering, why can they do this, and are there any obvious solutions to the problems this causes? Well, the main reason they can do this is that they have money, and most of the people who are scrutinizing them, even if they're like reasonably well paid, don't have the money to actually fight a case, even if they're in the right. Like, I've said this to people in lots of different contexts, being right isn't enough sometimes. Unless they personally know a lawyer who's willing to defend them for free, which, might already tell us something about the class character of the kind of person who would be able to defend against this in that case, they're kind of screwed. In the UK, we have something called legal aid, which is a program that's supposed to cover the expense of legal proceedings if you can't afford it. The program is for civil cases and has sadly been cut over and over and over and over again, which has had the effect of limiting access to justice for the cases that it does cover, such as these in the screenshot, which seem like a lot of kind of important things when you think about it. But the critical point here is that it does not include getting sued for defamation. And even if it did, the ability to access it would be limited, so if you can't afford lawyers, you're kind of shit out of luck. This also explains another problem with this whole thing. When I ask you to imagine which group of people or persons are most severely defamed and regularly defamed, you might immediately think of like politicians, or, well, politician if you're British, you probably have a particular one in mind. I may have even done a video about them. Or you might think that it's people with large media profiles generally, and just sort of like on a statistical level, you'd probably believe that to be the case. It happens more often, and therefore worse things will be said because more things are being said. A lot of the time, the perpetrator is the same as these cases, but the victims just tend to be members of the public. It's not a secret that I have a low opinion of the British press generally, But I think about how often stories are run on pretty normal people who just happen to be politically active. Like 2015, 2019, it was very in vogue to just pick up random ass members of the Labour Party and just say all sorts of horrible shit about them. Or like more recently, it's members of trade unions where they're like, they're a secret communist and yet they have Heinz ketchup. I don't know, that was a really bad example. That's not an example of defamation. You can't be suing people because they say you eat Heinz ketchup, even though it does taste the same as the Lidl home brand. But anyway, a lot of the things that are actually said are pretty outrageously libelous, or, you know, sometimes these things are said by like random assholes online. Sometimes also like journalists will see libelous statements in the wild and uncritically promote them, which gives them the potential to end up being news. What recourse do you have to respond if you're a regular person? Well, you can just say, no, that's not true. And maybe if you're fortunate enough to have clout on social media, you can run a crowdfunder or whatever. But the amount of money you'd probably need makes it really unlikely that you'll raise the money. Just a weird tangent. I came very close to being in this kind of situation at one point. A person had said something outrageous about me, and it was retweeted by a prominent UK journalist, which prompted the person to delete it, come into my DMs and act like he was doing me a favor. Now, I won't be specific about the incident or what was said, but this person was probably motivated in part by racism, given that this person had clicked through on a retweet of mine and forgot to untag me and decided to go in really hard on a black woman for no real reason, which seems to imply this person was trawling through my timeline in order to find a reason to yell at me. But anyway, at the time I did actually strongly consider suing someone, and I was mercifully calmed down by some good friends, and thank you to those friends. And to be honest, it's fucking dumb to sue someone over posts. It's just dumb. Also, no one cares. Like, no one actually gives a shit, right? If it ended up in a newspaper, that was different. But, like, if it's just people talking shit, who cares, right? My point is that if it had spiraled out of control, I would have had no real way to establish that what was said about me wasn't true, other than responding and explaining how it wasn't. And not to be, like, that about it, but if you're explaining, you're kind of losing, right? And which, under those circumstances, too, would have been pretty difficult. And I'm in a situation where I have, like, a support system around me and people who are willing to fight my corner, as happened in another similar incident involving a journalist of quite some stature. So imagine if you don't have those things, how difficult it must be. To get us somewhat back on topic and away from me for a second, there are some solutions here, including making access to legal assistance easier and cheaper, amending the penalties and guidelines so that they're not quite so ruinous in the case of just some guy chatting shit. I think guys can chat shit. That's what I'm really here fighting for. And also making it easier for courts to just dismiss these cases out of hand. The UK was meant to be passing some kind of anti-slap legislation which allows judges to dismiss the cases. But as always, it doesn't quite do the job. It covers people reporting on economic crime, which, fine, yeah, you should probably cover those people, with a focus on Russian oligarchs, of course, but, you know, if it means that we're exposing all sorts of stuff by our own capitalists, that's also fine. I'll chalk it up as a conditional win. To give an example, these changes to the law would not necessarily protect the survivors of abuse who speak out about their experiences and name their abusers. The law also, at least in places where I've read it, requires sort of the ascertaining of intent, which is pretty vague because I don't think anyone who could afford a good law firm to push defamation cases for them is going to be out there being like, I intend to prevent this person from exercising legitimate speech, like, on the record. That's the performance of a weird supervillain, not of an actual billionaire or millionaire or corporation. Like, that's like Shadowrun shit, right? So there's a lot of potential gaps even when we're sort of looking at tackling this stuff. The case that I think of is billionaires getting mad online and targeting people making accurate posts about them. You might be interested to know that I have 2 video ideas that relate either in part or entirely to a very famous UK billionaire, who I will not name, who's had her brain absolutely melted I don't really know if I can write the thing I want to, because this billionaire is so small-time that she's sued people for offering their honest opinion about her, and that I would say are statements of fact and therefore not defamation. But like we've sort of been pointing out this whole time, do you want to go to court against a billionaire? Like, billionaires are literally richer than God in some cases. Like, you do not have the financial muscle, even with like clout and crowdfunders, to stand up to that. That's why Americans and people who live in America tend to have more of the videos about her that I've seen. And yeah, good for them. While I wouldn't say that we should adopt the American model of speech, it definitely has its perks as opposed to here, where we're chasing shadows on free speech and not really seriously looking at how people with actual power and actual intent to silence people are behaving. It's just kind of interesting to me. I don't know, you know, maybe that's something we can think about a little bit. So I just want to sort of round off with a few broad thoughts on it. So I went into this thinking, you know, like, maybe there are bigger threats to free speech than university students. And I believe that to be factually the case. And this is pretty significantly more of an issue, in my opinion. And because it cuts both ways, right? It is both protecting billionaires and corporations and so on from really reasonable scrutiny, and it also protects small-time daytime TV stars who are very clearly becoming radicalized from having to deal with the social consequences of that, which is that people will say, you have become radicalized and also you seem like an asshole. And I think it's not illegal to say that. You shouldn't face like a legal penalty to say, I think this person is an asshole. Like, I think that's a problem, and I think that a system that allows that to happen, for people to be silenced for expressing honest opinion, sincerely held opinions, is not good, right? I hate to be controversial about it. And the thing is, it has wide-ranging impacts, because look, I mentioned that video idea I had. I cannot comfortably pursue the thing I want to say and to the degree of detail that I want to do it, because I am afraid of getting sued. Not because I'm going to defame someone or do something stupid like that, but because it is a matter of interpretation, and sometimes all you need is more money. Like, being right isn't enough. And that's kind of the horrible down note that I'm gonna end the video on. I'm really sorry it wasn't something more positive, but I guess it kind of is what it is at this point. So thanks for watching, everyone. Remember to like, subscribe, all of the good stuff, and I also need to thank Emma, who made the excellent thumbnail for this one. I mean, it was just really, really good this time. And also maybe my partner, I don't know if she proofread this or not. It's unclear as to whether she proofread it or not. But you know what? Thanking her anyway, because she's great. And I also need to thank the patrons and member, not members just yet, but patrons and member, particularly Drone Riff from Kusho, Classy Slider, John N, and also our one member, Nadir Jiwa. Thank you so much for your support. Everyone, if you want to get the videos a day early, you want to vote on what the next video is going to be, all of the good stuff there. Look, the benefits are all available. And also, yes, I know I'm going to get the emotes and badges made for YouTube membership. I've just had a bit of a nightmare this week, okay? So we're just going to have to accept that it's going to take a bit of time. But that apology aside, thank you so much. I will catch you all on the next video, and yeah, get a good look at this bedroom, because you will probably never see it again on a video. Famous last words. I'm definitely gonna have to record in here again, aren't I? Well, anyway, just in case, say goodbye to the bedroom, and I will catch you on the next video, which better not be in here, otherwise I'm gonna look really dumb. See ya.